Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
We're live at the Miami Book Fair, Neil Haley Show, powered by Life Improvement Radio. And I tell you, it's kind of funny. I think that sometimes people spend time together. This year we only did it for one day. But Eric and I at least spend on the phone, and we might talk sometimes, but we really spend the most time talking to each other at the Miami Book Fair. So every year we kind of get to know what's going on with each other through that because we're so busy. Eric, wouldn't you agree that you and I are the busiest people in the world? We never have time for many things. We have to keep moving and grooving. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I have to say our wives have patience of Job. Because our wives have to put up with us doing this all nonstop all the time, running around with like we're on fire.
Hey, see, you're early married. My wife, I wouldn't. She is definitely the saint, but she definitely is getting fed up with it at times. But I'm excited to welcome on to the show, and it's a really great topic. I have an undergrad in history, Terry Hunter from Princeton. You're the author of Bound in Wedlock about slavery in the U.S. from the 1800s to 1900s. Terry, thanks for calling. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. It's Tera, and I'm a faculty member at Princeton.
No, so Tera, I got Terry on the text. I'm sorry about that. And
that's
okay. You are a
no
faculty member from Princeton. You are a faculty member
from Princeton.
From Princeton, right, Tera? Yes, okay.
Right.
Thanks for. I appreciate you coming on the show. And so, Tera, kind of tell us specifically enough. This is your first time at the Miami Book Fair to tell the story. Have you ever been a participant before?
I have been a participant before. I came many years ago to talk about my book, To Joy My Freedom, Southern Black Women's Lives and Labors After the Civil War, which is it's a book about working class black women, mostly domestic workers in Atlanta and other southern cities after slavery ended.
Very, very interesting. And from that process, you've written a series of books. Is that your background? Do you, as a professor, do you teach history?
I teach history, and I write history books, articles. I write for also for the public in places like the New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, places like that as well.
What topics are you writing about in the Huffington Post and different New York Times and stuff like that? Is it regarding history, or you go into the news of today as well?
Well, I often connect what's happening in the news with history. So, for example, I just wrote a piece for the New York Times a couple of weeks ago on the Stacey Abrams campaign in Georgia. So the connection that I made there were a group of domestic workers who were part of the National Domestic Workers Alliance who were canvassing, helping to basically get out the vote for Stacey Abrams, who was running for governor. And so I helped to contextualize their, sort of present-day campaigning with previous efforts that they've made, that domestic workers have made in the past to fight for justice, workers' rights, and so on. So I brought up the example of a strike that was organized by domestic workers in Atlanta in 1881.
So we're still dealing with this today. That is terrible, Tera. And I think that we need to kind of explain things in more way. We're still struggling through this process even years later. I mean, centuries later.
Yes, so these women are basically, they've organized themselves as domestic workers to improve their wages, to improve conditions, and it's a national organization, and there are chapters throughout the country. And so it's taken a long time to get to that point, but the article was also trying to make a case for seeing connections between events in the past and events that are happening today. So in the past, it was much more difficult for domestic workers to organize, and yet a group of women who were the laundry workers, called the washerwomen, they organized the largest strike in the history of the city of Atlanta back in 1881. So that was really remarkable. So I was trying to show how, those two events are really connected, thinking about today and the past.
And so, but you still think they're struggling, even today, domestic workers, to try to form unions in different places, right? even today.
Absolutely.
We're not getting leaps and bounds the right progress we get. Really, what frustrates me, and this is honest to God truth, I've kind of pulled an undercover boss, Tera, where I've kind of gone back to work a little bit for one of my clients, and then I see how we treat other workers, and it really frustrates me. And it frustrates me in the fact that just because we're sometimes more educated than the workers doesn't mean that they're not hard workers and they should be treated the same. We take in this country and probably all over the world, Tera, if we are more, educated or have more money, that we look down on them. And when I see it happen, it really frustrates me. Why? And I don't understand it. So that the more forming unions for people that might not have that education, need other people to help them, the better they're going to be protected, because a lot of times, bottom line, a lot of entrepreneurs, they just want to make money. They don't care about what happens to that worker. They might act like they do, but then they treat them like they're children. And that frustrates me, and I see it all the time still, even in professions that don't require a college degree. And you see how bosses treat them and things like that. I don't know how we can change those things, because everyone that works should be treated like a successful person that has that deserves to have a living wage.
Right, exactly. Yes, we haven't gotten to that point yet. And so that's why these women were actually campaigning for a governor who would actually, who was supporting a living wage, who was supporting, universal health care, who was supporting good public education, all of those things that are important for all working people.
But how can...
Tera, I have a quick... I'm sorry, go ahead, Neil.
Go ahead, Eric. Go, Eric. Go with the question.
No, I was just curious, since the current political landscape and how charged things are right now, how's been the reception with the book? I mean, I would imagine it's got to be pretty good timing with what's going on in the country, and the release of the book.
Yes. So I think the book has definitely, got people curious about what kinds of connections can we draw between slavery and today, if any, what's happening in terms of current-day patterns in marriage and family compared to previous generations, especially in the period of slavery. So it's definitely generated some conversations around today.
And Tera, I see that's why people are looking to really rise up in certain ways and say, we cannot allow... Everyone deserves to have a living wage. Everyone does not deserve to struggle, especially when they're putting the work ethic in. They're doing what they need to do. They're working hard, and yet they can't pay enough bills or afford health care. And I think that a book like this speaks to specific areas and how many people are just working for the next paycheck and struggling when our politicians today just don't see it. And I'm glad that you bring up these different things. What do you think needs to change? We need to change administrations. We need to form and have. I think we need to have more than two political parties, to tell you the truth, Tera, to kind of get this system out of here, because it's just constantly favors for one party to the other, and nothing ever really changes.
Right. And so, but I think we also need to have a fair system. So the election in Georgia just came to an end just last night. There was a lot of controversy around it because the Republican candidate was basically the Secretary of State who also supported suppressing the vote. So, we have to have fair elections in order to elect people who actually do support, those basic issues that are fundamental to human rights and a fair wage and health care and all those universal rights that we should extend to everyone just because they're human beings.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, that's very interesting. So tell us now about the book. We've kind of gone really political, but we heard about your background writing for the New York Times and writing for the Huffington Post. But let's go to the book so that our listeners out there can purchase it. Tell us about the book.
Okay. So the book that I'm here to talk about at the fair is called Bound in Wedlock: Slave and Free Black Marriage in the 19th Century. And so that book is a history of slavery and marriage. So in the context of slavery, African Americans were not allowed to marry legally. They were allowed to marry informally with their master's permission. And so I talk about both the constraints that imposed on enslaved people and also the ways they, despite having those constraints, the ways in which they created meaningful relationships. So I basically trace the history of marriage over the course of the 19th century, starting with slavery, going into the Civil War, going into the post-Civil War period when marriage becomes legalized, and then I end at the very end of the 19th century.
Wow. Very, very interesting. And you have a background as a history professor. How have your students felt about the book or any of the books that you've written? Do they come to you and start having dialogue and saying, reading it and all that stuff, and have those conversations? What have you seen with your students' feedback? Do they give you any feedback, or they, because you're their professor, they just give you encouragement? What would you say? Maybe that's a little hard, like especially maybe after the course is over and they know I'm not going to have Tera again. Let me talk about this, but it probably leads into a lot of conversations in class and stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I have great students, and they're very engaged, and they're just eager to learn, and so they're always excited about my work as a professor and other professors who are writing books. So they've been very receptive. I talk about some aspects of the book in the classes, depending on the class. If it's relevant, I'll bring it up and assign material that's relevant to the students. I haven't assigned the entire book to them, however. And so they're very interested in these issues.
Very good. Eric, any questions for Tera? I have more questions for sure, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious. It's very interesting subject matter. I'm curious to actually read the book. Is there any new books on the horizon? Anything past this you're looking into?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just said, is there any new books or projects like on the horizon? Anything coming up?
Well, I am working on a new project. It's still very in the early stages, but it's growing out of this project that I just did on marriage during slavery. So the book actually ends in the 20th century. So I go through the entire 19th century, and then the epilogue is about the 20th century, where I look at what's happened basically since 1900, roughly up to the present, and I look at the growing racial gap in marriage rates, which start to rise around the period of the 1940s, and I talk about the various factors that are leading to such differences in black versus white marriage rates over the course of the 20th century going into the 21st century. So I'm starting a new book on that theme, looking at marriage rates, family rates based on black and white differences in the 20th century and into the 21st century.
Very, very, very. Wow. Cool. And what are you going to be participating in at the Miami Book Fair, Tera? Are you on a few panels this weekend?
So, yes, I'm on a panel that deals with slavery. So there are a couple of other authors on that panel as well. That panel is on Sunday morning at 11 a.m., and that panel includes another book by an author that wrote about the Denmark-Vesey slave rebellion in South Carolina. And then I'm doing book signings after that event, but also doing book signings this evening, I think around 6 o'clock. So those are the two events that I have.
All right, best place we can find information on you, Tera, and learn more about you. Where can we go?
You can go to my website. My website, actually, it's terawhunter.com, and it has all of my information. It has information about the books that I've written. It has some of the pieces that I've written for various media outlets. So that's the best place.
You stay busy for sure. Do they ever bring you on television as an expert as well with writing for the Huffington Post and New York Times?
Well, I have not been. I've done radio. I've done documentaries. So there's a documentary that's coming out soon on Reconstruction that Skip Gates basically produced, Henry Louis Gates from Harvard, and it's a multi-part series, and that's going to be aired on PBS in, I think, February of next year, and I'll be in that.
I interviewed Harry. It was a very interesting interview we had, and we talked about his show. So very, very interesting. So thanks, Tara, for calling, and thanks for coming on the show. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. You're listening to Neil Haley's show, powered by the Life Improvement Radio, live from the Mind Book Fair, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.